Hey guys, Nine Figure Mindset by Brandon Dawson. We are on chapter 2 today, the entrepreneur's beginnings. Are entrepreneurs born or made? People have been arguing about nature versus nurture forever. My experience places me squarely in the nurture camp. My dad was the pastor of a local church and ran a small Christian school as well. My mom was the nurse who specialized in issues relating to hearing loss. They were loving parents who were totally devoted to their kids. My mom's work introduced her to the entrepreneur named Bill Austin, the man who invented the modern hearing aid, and went on to found Starkey's, which would become one of the world's preeminent makers of hearing aids. I moved to Minnesota with my mom in 1976, lived with her and my stepdad during Starkey's startup years. 1988, I moved back to Oregon and lived with my dad and my stepmom to finish out my middle school and high school. Still, I got to experience the excitement of watching Starkey's grow to a $350 million company. When business began booming, my stepdad and mom founded a charitable arm of Starkey's called the Starkey Hearing Foundation, which distributed free hearing aids to those who couldn't afford them. Then, in a chance conversation, put Starkey on the world map, and best of all, I had a role in it. Representing the foundation, my mom attended a Just Say No event in Minneapolis, which was hosted by the First Lady of the United States, Nancy Reagan, wife of President Ronald Reagan. My mom and Mrs. Reagan started talking, and when the First Lady heard about the family business, she exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, Ronald can't hear, but he doesn't want people to know." At the time, hearing impairment were stigmatized. Yes, and then President believed his would make people think he was old and feeble. Well, my mom told Nancy Reagan we could fit your husband with a brand new state of the art hearing aid that goes inside his ear. People wouldn't even know it was there. So my mom and my stepdad went into the president's California ranch to test the president's hearing, take an impression of his ear, and bring the molds back to the factory to have a device custom made for him. The Reagans wanted to keep it a secret. I was visiting my mom and stepdad, so I was enlisted as a secret internal courier. I remember walking through the factory holding the president's ear molds and thinking mum was the word in 1983. They built personalized hearing aids for him. He wore them for months before a reporter finally asked him what those things were in his ear. "These are my new Starkies," he said, grinning that well known grin of his. Needless to say, after the business became even crazier, I had experienced it firsthand during those summers and holidays when I had arrived to stay in town. Visiting my mom and stepdad wasn't about being pampered, it was about learning the hearing aid manufacturing and distribution business from soup to nuts. Did I take pride in my work and my contribution to the family business? I'm sure I felt some degree of pride, but I also felt a high degree of independence and self reliance. Even as an employee, I was a kid, I had to work my share, and there was no other frame of reference that I could relate to. It wasn't so much a case of loving or hating, it was just doing it because that's what you did. But working at Starkey's during school breaks in summer wasn't the only exposure I had to entrepreneurial endeavors. One of the earliest took me when I was in high school back in Oregon, where my dad and stepmother had 5 acre walnut orchard on their property every year after those walnuts fell. We gathered them up in 5 pound gun sacks and sold them out of the little roadside stands. Our revenue goal was $5,500, which paid the tuition to the Christian school I attended. I used to sit on the tractor and listen to Casey Kasem's American Top 40 on my little transistor radio, dreaming about the day that I could go to New York City and raise money and buy businesses and be a big shot. I told my friends my dreams. One fall, when I was high school junior and the year's walnut harvest was due, my parents decided to take a week's vacation together and empowered me. That's code for grounding me for breaking curfew to harvest this year's crop myself. On the Friday they left, I went to school and noticed a flyer on one of the lockers announcing the senior class was holding a fundraiser drive to raise $1,000 to finance the senior trip. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? I don't know who said that, either Plato or Frank Zappa, but the president of the senior class was a buddy of mine from the football team. I asked him if he and a few of the guys on the team would be willing to come out and help me pick up walnuts. I assured him I'd pay them, of course, and they could then use the money to help finance their senior trip. Little could I have realized that not only would my buddies show up, but also the rest of the senior class and their brothers, sisters, and parents. I found myself managing 100 people, and just 3 days later, our orchard was picked cleaner than it had ever been before. It usually takes us 3 weeks to finish this job, I told my buddies. After giving the school the $1,000 to cover the senior trip, I had $7,700 in profit in hand and welcomed my parents back home with the best looking orchard they had ever seen in their lives. How did you do all this? Was the first question out of my dad's mouth. I told him all about how I, faced with a boring chore, I made a business out of it over the weekend. I proved something to myself, everyone else, that you can meet a big challenge head on, overcome it, and did that almost effortlessly. Just as important, I became an instant hero among the senior class and my fellow juniors alike. I felt a surge of confidence in my ability to engage other people in my project and see it through to the satisfaction of all concerned. This was a feeling and skill I would remember and cultivate throughout my life. I didn't recognize it back then, but looking into the rearview mirror, I see this as the early example of learning that collaborating with other people in a project in which everyone wins is not only possible, but also more sustainable and more fun. I learned that the more people you can surround your challenge with, the fastest, and if you manage things well, the better you will be able to accomplish things. At a deeper level, I learned that even if you weren't nuts about every aspect of your work, and God knows I hated harvesting walnuts, you could love the impact that work produces. Lots of people end up hating their jobs because jobs consume precious time and energy. But if you can make your job about something more than work, you can fall in love with the impact. The parents who came out in the cold and rain to harvest walnuts with their kids didn't care about the money or the price of the trip. They picked and bought the walnuts to show their kids that they loved them. There was a huge lesson in that insight, the power of purpose. After high school, I began taking classes at Portland State University 3 days a week. It was Starkey's factory in Portland, so every Wednesday I would go over to the factory and get on the phone to sell hearing aids to distributors. Most entrepreneurs have a zone of genius, the thing they're not only gifted at doing, but would do all day, even if nobody paid them. My zone of genius was sales. My sales technique was purely instinctive, and it felt easy to just pick up the phone and start talking to people I'd never met. Hey, Brandon here. I'd say, I'm calling from Starkey's. Hey, Don, what's your inventory look like? Do you need more hearing aids? Whether they said no or yes, I got into the habit of asking follow up questions. I might ask them if they had any hearing aids on their shelves, and if they said no, how many they had sold previous week. If they said four, I'd ask what would happen if they stocked 10 devices rather than their usual quantity of four. Do you think you could sell them? I'd ask. As often as not, they replied, why, yes, Brandon, yes, I think we would. Bingo! And if they expressed concern about excess inventory, I reminded them that Starkey's 30-day return policy for unused or defective devices, a policy most of the sales reps either forgot about or didn't put in their toolkit during the orientation. The upshot was that I regularly sold more hearing aids working 1 day a week than full timers did in five. My success did not go unnoticed. One day I got a call from my stepdad asking me how life was treating me. I'm sure the savvy businessman in him quickly sussed out that I wasn't exactly thriving in college. We're opening another factory in Atlanta and need an outside sales rep, he said. If you're not excited about staying in school or as good as you seem to be at sales, I may have an out for you. We all hoped my creativity and ambition would make immediate impacts in the company's success. I moved to Atlanta, uh, signed out my company car, started crushing it as far as sales went. I felt free as a bird, 19 years old with a company car, an expense account, and a sales territory that included 11 states to explore. I quickly became one of the company's top sales people, selling hearing aids out of the trunk of my car to doctors and holding open house forums to educate prospective customers to Starkey's awesome technology. Then, 6 months or so into the job, I discovered that my boss in Atlanta was having an affair with women in the office. I confronted him on it. He fired me from my own family's company. Felt I couldn't talk to my mother since he had only recently found um, Recently found out I wasn't going to college in Portland. I couldn't face telling her that the job in Atlanta was a bust. I felt my stepdad should be the one calling me rather than taking my boss's word for it. I felt trapped, so I called no one. I was out of a job, out of a car, out of money, and soon I was homeless. But something happened to me in the coming days, weeks, and months that changed my life forever. I learned how to make it on my own. I needed to find some spending money, so I started hustling pool with a dude named Slim. We started pulling down a few hundred a day. Before long, I met another fellow who sold coupons for discounted services from area businesses to local college students. All of a sudden, between hustling and the advertising gig, I was making more money than I had made at Starkey's. For the first time in my life, I could do whatever I wanted to do, and I didn't have to answer to anyone in the world. I had another entrepreneurial milestone when I convinced my coupon partner to expand our business to include apartment complexes as well as universities. Like universities, apartments brought people to the area who might not be familiar with the local amenities and businesses. These residents lived a short walk from many businesses that we could sell to. Expanding our business is the way taught me about scale in primary and secondary markets. The large lesson about scale and innovative technology came to me when I happened to walk into a video store one day. Those of you born after 2000 may not know that a video store was, before people could stream content from their internet connections, they used to rent tapes or movies and television programs at the video store. There were mom and pop stores and large chains, and the most successful of which included Blockbuster and Hollywood Video. I remember going into the mom and pop one day and asking owner how to be competed against the chains. Do you know that for every 3 copies of a new movie release you have on our shelves, Blockbuster has something like 50 copies? I asked. And did you know that they don't even have to pay for the videos? They're so big they get them for free and just pay the distributors a percentage of what they rent. The pop brushed off my question by arguing that customer loyalty made up the lack of scale. Over time, even after I left Atlanta, I watched as the mom and pop stores were displaced by the big chains, and the big chains were displaced by streaming. There was no way a little business owner could compete against large scale, innovative business models that allowed for rapid scaling, technology advancements, and marketing leverage at unprecedented levels. I've never stopped thinking about the period and over the course of the career has spent millions of dollars researching the whole cycle, mom and pop stores to big box stores to streaming services, like Netflix. The cycle took about 20 years. This might seem like a long time, but it went by a blink of an eye. Even now in my pres- presentations to business, I draw on what I learned walking Atlanta's Jimmy Cramer Boulevard. Don't get so focused and comfortable with your situation that you forget to expand and innovate. If you don't expand and innovate, you will eventually be out of business. After about 3 weeks, my stepdad called to tell me he wanted to bring me back to Starkey. But I was having so much fun knocking it out of the park in Atlanta that I said no. And after 6 months in Atlanta, the boss who fired me was himself fired for sexual harassment, which led to me receiving another call from my stepdad asking me to reconsider coming back into the fold. This time to as his assistant sales manager in Minneapolis. I felt totally vindicated, and since I wanted to advance up the ladder at Starkey's, agreed to the return. But I also remember feeling that although I was going back to work with my stepdad, I would always be able to take care of myself. I didn't have to depend on the wombs of another person. Although my second stint at Starkey's, which began in 1989, put my entrepreneurial ambitions on hold for a while longer, I did use the period to serve as an entrepreneurial capacity. This became most obvious in my taking over Starkey's promotional cruise for our loyal and premium customers. The goal was to thank our customers for their loyalty while incentivizing them to remain loyal for enrolling them in the new program. The director of sales, who had previously overseen this project, had failed to produce enough future sales commitments to finance the cruise. So my stepdad put me in charge of firing the sales director and running the project. I had an idea how to do it, which involved printing coupon books the sales reps could give to their customers for discounts on the hearing aids. I raised the price on the devices themselves just a bit. Within 90 days, and with a month to spare, we raised the additional money needed to fund the cruise. It succeeded in spectacular fashion, but made no friends in the process. I had a little bit of a reputation for firing my boss, and none of the VPs were big fans of me. I can't deny that I was brash and tenacious son of a gun, as I had done in Atlanta, seeing the absolutely crushing it from the sales perspective. For the next year promotional cruise, I raised the sales goal from 4 million to 12 million through the use of my coupon program. As in the previous year, we met our target by raising prices on the new products that our customers were signing on to purchase. While I was busy making money and burning bridges back at the headquarters, my mom and stepdad began a lengthy divorce process that I managed to get in the middle of. I won't belabor the whole thing. This is a business book, not a soap opera. But the long story short is that I realized Starkey's was not going to be a place where I could pursue my dreams and ambitions of making something of myself and making something of my own. So I made a decision. I told my stepdad I wanted to talk to him one night. Told him I was going to do. I'm quitting effective immediately, I said. I'm selling everything, including the brand new house we bought, and moving to Oregon to start my life over. I would leave with my wife, my 2-year-old, and my newborn, and I wouldn't look back. He tried to convince me to reconsider, but I tasted a delicious brand of independence in Atlanta, and it suited me. It's 1995, I was 27 years old, and if I felt I knew anything about myself, it was that I could do it all again, and even better this time. Atlanta had changed my life forever. Now, as I was going to draw on that same resilience and confidence to do again, this time in Oregon. So, for additional resources in his book, ninefiguretools.com. Another great chapter by Brandon Dawson. Chapter 2 is the entrepreneurial beginnings. Just talks about how he's in and out of Starkey's and then did a little coupon selling in the Atlanta market. And then now he's 27 years old, moved back to Oregon. Looking forward to chapter 3. Thanks, everybody.